Aloha. Today I want to talk to you about 7 tips for growing lemon trees in Hawaii. Here we have an improved Myers lemon tree that is just filled with fruit right now. You can see this is a small tree. It's maybe 3 feet tall. It's leaning over. It's very young and it's filled. It's got over 50 lemons in it right now and they're pretty good size. It's having trouble holding them all up. So you don't need a huge tree to get a lot of fruit, and in a few years this tree is going to produce more fruit than I'll ever need. I'll never need lemons again. Alright, so I've got 7 tips. Tip number 1 is location. Choose a proper location when planting your lemon tree. Lemon trees like full sun, so you want to find a place with full sun and not too much competition. I would say give it 15 feet on all sides away from other trees, so it's not in the shade, it's not competing for sun, it's not competing for nutrients. So it's going to like full sun. It takes a lot of energy to grow this amount of fruit, and also give it some space so it's got some breathing room. Now, I did not do that with this tree because I didn't have the ability. When we got here, it was all overgrown jungle, trees everywhere. I had to literally cut down trees, dig out stumps just to plant a fruit tree. So I didn't have enough time to clear everything to give all these trees room. So this little island right here, this hill, I actually planted 5 citrus trees. A couple limes, an orange, and a couple lemons. So I did that on purpose just so that I could get them in the ground, get them growing, get them to put out a lot of branches so that later I could come, take some cuttings, and make some air layers, and then make new trees and spread them out later to where they have more room and are going to be happier, bigger trees. So this is kind of like a little nursery. You know, you can do this if that's your intention. If you just plant a bunch of stuff close together to get it going, and then just take tons of cuttings, tons of branches, and spread it around your property and put them in better locations later, and then you can remove these later on. But if you're just going to plant a tree or two and you want it to stay like that forever, I don't recommend doing that. I recommend a huge area with 15 feet on each side, no space, so it has plenty of room to grow, plenty of room to stretch, and plenty of sun. Also on location, you don't want to plant it somewhere like in a swamp where it's going to be underwater all the time, and the roots are going to get wet and it's not going to be starving for oxygen. That might kill it. It's definitely going to kill off some roots. You also don't want to plant it on top of the hill in the driest place to where it's all sandy and rocky and it's tons of drainage to where the water drains through immediately and then it dries out. That's also going to make it struggle and it's not going to produce well. You want a happy medium. You want a place where it's going to have plenty of water, but not too much water, not too little, not too much drainage. So don't plant in a swamp, don't plant on top of a rock. Find a nice happy medium with some rich, nice, moist soil. Alright, tip number 2 is going to be soil. So after you found your location in a beautiful, full, sunny spot, like it is right now here, you're going to want to prepare your soil. So I like to dig a nice large hole. Sorry about that, lemon. I like to dig a nice large hole, much bigger than needed, and really mix everything in really good so it gets a good strong start. So with the lemon tree, like I'm saying, you want drainage. You don't want to put it in a swamp. You don't want to put it where it's like wet all the time, and you don't want to put it on top of rock. You want to have some drainage, but it doesn't need to be excessive. So I like to mix in a little bit of cinder. You can mix in sand, something like that. I don't do too much, maybe 20%, 25%, depending where you live and how much rain you get. So I mix in a little bit of cinder or drainage. I put in some mulch, I put in some compost, and I put in some chicken manure. And I mix that all up so it's got a lot of drainage, of course, but it's also got a lot of moisture retention. The mulch, the compost, the chicken manure, all that stuff will get wet and it will hold moisture in that soil. But it will also allow a lot of drainage because there's pieces of wood in there, pieces of rock, all this different stuff to create a nice texture in the soil. So that's how I do it. I mix up cinder, chicken manure, compost, mulch, worm castings if I have them, and I just mix that all up, maybe a little lime, mix everything all up, get it nice, and then I have the hole really large, and I put that all in there, put the tree in there, fill it up, put some mulch on top, and you got one happy lemon tree. Soil is important. Lemon tree is going to prefer, like most plants, a nice, rich, healthy soil. Alright, tip number 3, and this is an important one if you want the tree to be happy and grow quickly, is mulch. Especially here in Hawaii, I think that's like the secret to happy plants is lots of mulch. So you're going to want to mulch the tree often as well, especially here, depending where you live, of course, but here it rains all the time. So you're going to want to mulch every 2 or 3 months if you can, and also depending what you got. I have a lot of chickens, so my chickens will come scratch the mulch down, move it around, so you'll have to maybe mulch more often. But at least every 3 months, put some mulch down. And you know, it could be 6 inches deep or up to a foot deep. You know, the less often you're going to have to mulch. If you put 2 inches down, you might have to mulch every month. If you put a foot down, maybe you don't have to mulch for another 4 months. So nice and thick layer of mulch. We got a great place to get mulch here, and you're going to want to put it up to the base, but not touching. So I like to do maybe at least 2 inches around the base of the tree, the trunk, all the way without the mulch coming up to it, just in case the mulch is still cooking and heating up. You don't want it, smothering the trunk. So I leave a 2 to 3 inch space around the trunk where there's no mulch touching it, and then going all the way out to the drip line or a little farther with the mulch. And again, I would do that every 2 or 3 months. If you live somewhere where it rains a lot, because it's going to stay moist, it's going to break down and feed that soil quicker. If you live somewhere where it's really dry and dry, I guess, that mulch is going to break down slower if it's dry a lot of the time. So here in Hawaii, it rains all the time here. It's always moist. It seems like it just disappears really quickly. So mulch is number 2, and that's a super important one. If you want to keep the plants happy, keep them mulched. It also keeps the roots happy because the lemon tree has roots that are kind of sitting right around the surface feeding. So it'll keep those roots moist. It'll keep the worms moist. They'll be up there running around. It keeps the fungi moist, the microbes moist and happy. Just keeps all the soil microbiome nice and happy in there. And with the mulch now, we have a facility that makes the mulch. It just grinds up all the plants, ferments it, cooks it for a while, and then we get this nice black mulch. But if you don't have that, you can use really anything. You can go around and cut down, extra weeds, branches, things, lay it around. If you have wood chips, you can, chip up trees. We got a wood chipper, so we'll chip up wood chips, put the wood chips around there, some branches, some weeds, different kinds of plants. You can kind of make a mulch out of anything. It's just going to help keep the soil moist and break down over time. It's getting hot. The sun's coming out. So tip number 4 for you is going to be fertilizer. Now obviously everything's got to eat, so fertilizer is pretty important, and the fertilizer comes after the mulch because you want to put the fertilizer right on top of the mulch. So mulch is mostly carbon. It's got a bunch of stuff in it, but it's a very high carbon source. So if you put the fertilizer on top of the mulch after you put the mulch down, so you're going to want to fertilize at the same time every 2, 3, 4 months. Whenever you go ahead and put the mulch down, go ahead and put the fertilizer down, and that fertilizer is going to sit on top of the carbon, the mulch, and it has a lot of nitrogen in it. It's going to help break down that carbon and unlock all those extra nutrients to feed the plant. So you can use a citrus fertilizer, which you can buy made just for citrus trees. I used to use down to earth citrus fertilizer. You can do that, or you can use an animal manure. So I've got a bunch of chickens, I had goats. I use animal manure. So I'll put the mulch down, and then I'll go and put a bunch of chicken manure down around it on top of the mulch, or duck manure, or goat manure, or horse manure, or cow manure, any manure you have. So I had duck, I had chicken, I have duck, chicken, goat manure that I use. Chicken's just fine. You can just use one. You can use multiple. That's fine. So I would do it at the same time I mulch, put the manure on top of the mulch, or the fertilizer. If you buy the citrus fertilizer, just sprinkle that around on top of the mulch. So yeah, fertilizer is important. If you just do mulch, the tree's not going to be happy because the mulch is mainly carbon. There's not a lot of nitrogen. There's not a lot of other stuff in there to feed the plant. It will break down and turn into some nutrients, but it's just not enough. So you're going to add the mulch, and you're also going to want to add the fertilizer. So yeah, again, with the fertilizer and the mulch, it really depends on your climate. Here it rains so much that the nutrients and everything gets stripped out of the soil so quickly that if you want to keep your trees happy, you really do need to fertilize them every few months at least. If you live somewhere else where that's not a problem, you might only have to fertilize your trees once per year, or maybe twice per year, or here, you might have to do it every 2 to 3 months, depends how much rain you have. Alrighty, tip number 5 is lime, or dolomite lime. So this one's important, especially if you live somewhere with acidic soil. So like here in Hawaii, it rains a lot, the rain is acidic, and the pH in the soil is going to be lower and lower. So as the pH gets too low, certain nutrients get locked out. So you're going to add the lime, and you can just sprinkle it around on top of the mulch and fertilizer every, once or twice a year. I go around and sprinkle the mulch around the lime. I go around and sprinkle lime around all the plants. Don't put it right up to the base, but just sprinkle it around, out to the drip line, on all the plants, and it will help raise the pH. It'll bring that pH up, which will help unlock nutrients. So, like I said, as the pH gets lower, nutrients get locked out, and then you might have tons and tons of nutrients in your soil. Like your soil might just be filled with nutrients, enough for 5 years. But if the pH is wrong, the plant can't access them. The nutrients get locked out. So as you add that lime, it slowly raises the pH to a normal level, and then those nutrients unlock. So if your trees aren't like looking that happy, it could just be a pH issue. And after the lime and everything adjusts, the plant might just turn, super abundant because the lime raised the pH and unlocked all those nutrients that were sitting dormant in your soil. So the lime is super important if you live somewhere where the soil pH is not quite proper. And depending where you live, you might need to apply it more. If you live somewhere, you might only need to apply it once. Here, some people apply it every couple months just because it rains so much. The soil, gets washed out of nutrients and the pH just gets changed quickly. Alrighty, tip number 6 is trace minerals. Now this is an important one. They don't need a ton of these because they just need traces, but it's very important. If your trees aren't looking quite happy, they just look a little off, it literally could be just from the trace minerals. So you can buy citrus fertilizers that contain trace minerals in them. Sometimes they actually say with trace minerals, and then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're just using like mulch and animal manure and stuff like that, it might be deficient in a few different trace minerals, and you might have to add them. So I don't add the trace minerals specifically a lot because I add a lot of different things on the property. I've got a lot of chickens, so I throw eggshells out, which has a lot of minerals. I'll throw like bones out left over from bone broth. I'll throw some oyster shell out. But I do buy trace minerals as well. The stuff I get is called azomite, I believe, and it's just basically rock dust. It's ground up rocks, and it has tons and tons of trace minerals. So you could sprinkle around a little bit of that trace minerals every once in a while, a couple times a year. If your trees look kind of weird, give them some of those trace minerals. You could mix it up with the mulch and the fertilizer just so it's like with it, and then put that down. What I do is I also put the trace minerals in my compost tea, and then I spray that around, and that's another way to give them the trace minerals. So again, if your trees look a little off and not quite as healthy as they should be, it could be trace minerals. So give them a little bit of trace minerals, see how they do. The other thing that has trace minerals that I use sometimes is seaweed. So I get kelp, organic kelp that I'll sprinkle around. I usually use the kelp in the compost tea. But you can also get like seaweed extracts and things like that, which all have trace minerals, and that's going to also help. So you can get in a lot of different ways: rock dust, seaweed extracts, or whatnot. All right, tip number 7 is compost tea. Now a lot of people don't do this just because it's easier to sprinkle some fertilizer around, but compost tea is really the secret if you want to have like really vibrant, healthy plants all the time. And I wish I did it more often. I only do it once or twice a year just because I am too busy. But preferably I'd like to do compost tea once a month, and your plants would just love you to death. And I prefer to make my own compost tea. I recommend you make your own compost tea. It's pretty easy. And then you just make it, brew it for 24 hours depending on your weather. You might have to brew it a little longer, might have to brew it a little less. And then I would recommend do a foliar feed, spray all over the leaves, everything, the stems, and a soil drench. And you can make 2 different kinds of compost tea, which is what I do. I do a veg, so if the plant is just mainly growing leaves and branches, I would give it a veg tea, which is going to be higher in nitrogen. And then if it's fruiting, or right before it's starting to fruit, or it's flowering, I would do a bloom or a fruit tea, which is going to be lower in nitrogen but higher in phosphorus and potassium. And the nice thing about the compost tea is it's like instant food. When you sprinkle mulch and manure around, it takes a long time for that mulch and manure to really start breaking down and feed the plant. Over time, it's like slow release fertilizer. But when you give the compost tea to it, it's like immediate food. So if the plant has deficiencies, it can actually fix those deficiencies really quickly, especially if you're doing a foliar feed. I mean, you can notice a difference in a few days versus, a month or two when you put the stuff down on the ground. So it's great for fixing deficiencies. It's great to add some of those trace minerals in immediately, and just to give it a nutrient boost if they're getting a little hungry. And yeah, I recommend you make your own. I recommend doing 2 different kinds of veg or leafy green kind, and then also a bloom or fruiting kind for when you're fruiting. And the compost tea is great for adding a lot more fertility into the soil. It also adds beneficial fungi, beneficial microbes to, inoculate your soil with all those beneficial microbes. So the compost tea is just filled with microbes, fungi, and all that life that you can put into your soil. When you have a living soil, the plants just do a lot better. And yeah, like I said, you can do compost tea, once, twice, 3, 4 times a year. If you do it like every month though, just a nice light bit, not too concentrated, your plants are just going to go crazy. They're going to be super happy. Alright, I got one bonus tip for you, which doesn't really apply too much to me here, but I figured I'd mention it just in case you live in somewhere else. So here in Hawaii, we get rain all the time. So I never ever water these. I never have to worry about that. There's always plenty of water. There's usually too much water. But lemon trees like a lot of water. So if you live somewhere where it's dry and it doesn't rain very often, you are going to have to water them if you want them to be happy, especially at certain times of the year. So check your soil, put your finger down. If it's dry an inch or 2 down, give it some water, especially as it's starting to flower and it's putting out flowers. So we got new flowers here. If it's starting to put out flowers and starting to set fruit, give it some water so that it doesn't think it's in a drought. If it's really dry and it doesn't have enough water and it's starting to flower and starting to set fruit, you might get flowers that drop off, you might get fruit that drop off because it thinks it's in a drought. Yeah, so here I don't have to worry about that. But if you live somewhere where it's dry, on the other side where it's dry all the time, or somewhere else, you may need to water your lemon tree, especially when it's young and just developing. The other time I would recommend water is as the fruits are maturing. So 3/4 of the way through, they're getting big. I would give it some water if it's dry and needs it, so that it can really fill and plump up those fruits and give them, make them really juicy. If it's in a drought-like environment while these are finishing up, your fruits are going to be more dry. They're going to be less juicy. They're not going to be as good. So that's your bonus tip for you. Water. Lemon trees like a lot of water, but again, you don't want them soaking in water, roots wet all the time, swampy-like material, or swamp kind of environment. but they do like a lot of water. So if you're in a dry place or in some kind of a drought, make sure your lemon trees have enough water. All right, there you go. That's your 7 tips for growing lemon trees in Hawaii. I hope that helped. I hope you learned some stuff. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, leave me a comment below if you want to know anything else about lemon trees or if you have any other questions. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Aloha. I'm gonna go make some lemonade. Time for lemonade. The smell of fresh citrus is just amazing.